influenced the new Christian religion.
The earliest documents we have from Rome do read to us as though, yes, these people had close connections with liberal Greek synagogues. There were 14 synagogues in ancient Rome, and they were all financially independent. And it does look as though that sort of way of organization influenced the Christians, because the Christians also seem to have had quite a number of independent congregations meeting in private houses.
A number of congregations then, patterned on Judaism. It was into this community that Paul arrived, the apostle of the Gentiles. But the Christian church in Rome clearly existed before his arrival. Direct proof of Peter's existence in Rome is ambiguous. There is no reliable information about his activity or the length of his stay here. But there are legends. At a time of persecution, Peter was persuaded to flee the city, and here on the Via Appia he met Jesus and called to him, "Domine, quo vadis?" Lord, where are you going? An 11th century church now marks the spot where Peter met Jesus, who, in reply to the question, said he was going back to the city to be crucified again. Peter realized that he must face persecution himself, and he turned back to Rome to be crucified, in deference to his Savior, crucified upside down. It's a legend, perhaps, but the faithful still venerate the spot where the imprint of Jesus' feet are marked in stone. The persecution from which Peter was fleeing was real enough. It was instigated by the infamous Roman Emperor, Nero. In 64 AD, a great fire destroyed much of Rome. The citizens believed that it was no accident. Nero had made himself sufficiently unpopular to be suspected of arson. In need of a scapegoat, he turned to the Christians. After all, had these Christians not refused to honor the Roman gods? They were hunted down and made to suffer. None more so than their leaders. Paul, a Roman citizen, was beheaded. Peter, the Jew, crucified. Despite the absence of definite proof of Peter's existence in Rome, there is no real reason to doubt the ancient tradition that both he and Paul were put to death here. That memory is manifest most strongly on the 29th of June each year, the feast day of St. Peter and St. Paul. It is also believed that this church was built on the very site of St. Peter's tomb, and that the Pope is truly St. Peter's successor. Can such claims be justified? Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. Christ's words look down on the high altar of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Under this high altar lie the remains of men who were the first inheritors of that promise made by Christ to the Prince of the Apostles. This is their final resting place on earth, the grotto of the popes. They span the centuries. They span the countries of Western Europe. All in their time influenced one way or another the shaping of history. This is their burial place, located one strata, as it were, under the floor of the basilica. Go down further, and you reach the very start of the history of the popes. The site of that history is also a pagan site. Dramatically discovered during the Second World War was the location of a long-forgotten pagan cemetery. There are aristocratic graves here, family shrines, decorated with the pictures of pagan gods. And here, a mysterious red wall. The excavators assumed it was a boundary marking the limit of the pagan cemetery. Beyond it, so it was believed, the tomb of Peter himself. Here, directly under the high altar of the basilica, a small pillared shrine was found. Written accounts going back to the 2nd century record that pilgrims were shown the grave of Peter at just about this spot. Here now was proof. On the walls beside the shrine, stone tablets, one in particular with many markings. Scientists have painstakingly deciphered the graffiti. They are clearly Christian, the M perhaps for Mary. Certainly the key row is here, invoking Christ. Some are very complicated, almost in code, lines from the key row joining A and O, Alpha and Omega. And in Greek, an inscription saying that Peter is here. At the base of this shrine, some human bones were discovered. We were refused permission to film them, but in 1965, Pope Paul VI declared them to be the relics of Peter. No one can be certain, but it may well be so, for if not here, where else are the bones of Peter?
There is no rival claim to that of Rome. Had there been somebody else who thought they had the bones of Paul or Peter, you may take it for granted we should have heard about it.
Certainly the faithful believe. Reverently decorated on this, his feast day, the foot of Peter's statue is worn thin with the believer's touch. But what of his successors? This is one of the most sacred and beautiful sites in Rome, the 12th century Basilica of St. Clement. This place encapsulates so much of the history of the early church in the city. These arches are not foundations, but the roof of an earlier church. So many of St. Clement's secrets lie underground. Dominican Father Paul Lawler is an archaeologist devoted to unearthing them. This skeleton dates from the 10th century. By Father Lawler's standards, modern. Descend further, you reach the 1st century and the remains of a pagan temple. Here, charcoal remains suggest Nero's fire. It's a complicated labyrinth, and many have argued that cheek by jowl with pagan monuments are rooms typical of the meeting places of the early Christians in Rome. The real significance of this place in our story is St. Clement himself, usually reckoned to be the 3rd pope after Peter. Around him, legends have grown, but he did exist, and in his person shows a church beginning to develop its ritual. Alas, here Clement has been decapitated by the ravages of time. Near his feet, the names of Peter and Linus, supposedly the first pope to follow the apostle, and about whom we know nothing. Clement is also known for a letter written allegedly by him.
In this letter, he tells the people of Corinth that they cannot choose leaders from among themselves simply at their own, whatever suits them. They have to accept the leaders